If from the literature you had a bunch of ideas already, then you could simply have done the second phase, but in this case you don't have that. So
Right, right. And in fact, I'm trying to get rid of the researcher bias by using this methodology, actually. By going in and not having that bias and just saying to these experts, tell me in your words about your work. And then I try to record that. And that's what the repertory grid.
I think to balance, and I sense there's some questions from our visitors as well.
Yes, sure.
What we'll do, because we're a little bit time constrained, we'll keep the first part of it limited to the committee, but then afterwards, after 1 o'clock or so, we'll have an open question session, so that everybody can dig in and get it out. Okay?
Okay, sure. Did that answer the question you're asking? Ron, did I answer your question? Okay. I showed you briefly the research methodology, so this is a little bit repetitious, but I just wanted to set this as a framework for the details that I'm going to give you now. Remember that there are 5 steps, and each of those steps has a specific outcome. That's part of the process that I'm doing.
First, let me ask one question. It's not to challenge him, I promise you. I just want to know, did credit score come up when you interviewed, or?
No, because I didn't ask the questions that way. The question I asked them was, when you look at the specific question I asked was, when you look at an identity document, what is it that makes you think that it's credible or not?
Okay.
So the credit score question just wouldn't have come up in that
Okay,
context.
thank you.
Sure. The first step here is to select the elements that represent the domain, and I had mentioned that I selected a list of actually 12 different types of identity documents. And the way that was done was I actually went to these organizations and talked to 1 or 2 people in each of the organizations to try and develop a list from their experience of what the documents are that they most commonly see when they're opening new accounts. And then I consulted with them to just refine the list. Some of the things were duplicative. Some of them they said, well, no, this is not, I mean, I would never accept this as an identity document, so we took that off. And eventually I worked that down to a list of 12. Okay? 12 types of identity document that might be presented, not one at a time, but some combination of those 12 when a new account is being opened. The second step is listing the constructs. That's the repertory grid interviews that I did in round 1. The round 1 interviews, that's step 2. I mentioned the repertory grid technique is designed to elicit an understanding of how people see their world, as I mentioned. In this particular case, understanding what constructs experts use when they're trying to determine credibility of the documents. Some examples of the underlying constructs that come up, and the details are in the document, of course. But for things like the issue or reputation. So when they look at a Florida International University ID, if I were to present that, they have some sense of the issuer's reputation. How much can I rely on FIU's process for issuing an ID? And I'm not going to say what their opinion was of an FIU ID, but that's just to give you an example of issuer reputation. Okay. Another, maybe better example is if I presented an Alaska driver's license, they tended to accept that just because states in general have a good reputation for issuing identity documents. So they tended to accept most any state's driver's license. Photograph and signature being present, that was important for a lot of people. And the presence of tamper-resistant features and identity documents was also another one of the attributes that was important. So the fact that it has a hologram, or that a Florida driver's license, the number has certain meanings. It tells you whether you're male or female, and it tells you your date, what date you were born in, and so on. Those kinds of features to prevent tampering. Also, as I mentioned, I asked the experts during this first round of interviews to tell me trends that they saw based on their experience that could completely change the way they go about evaluating credibility in identity documents. I wanted to get a sense of what different futures might look like so that I could develop the scenarios that I use. The results here identify 21 attributes that credible identity documents that seem to make identity documents credible. 6 trends came out. 3 of them were related to technology. 1 is the presence or absence of electronics on an identity document, a mag stripe, a barcode, in some cases an RFID chip. Presence or absence of advanced biometrics, like a fingerprint, DNA information, even in one case. Another technology-related trend was the trend towards virtual customers and digital identities. There are actually some banks now that will open an account online. So it's virtual customers in the new account setting. And there were 3 trends related to what I call strong or weak authentication. The 3 trends being: 1 is a trend towards having a single source of issuing identity documents. There's actually a big effort going on in this country to try and have one issuer of all identity documents. It's called the Real ID Act. And there are some countries, the UK is almost there, Australia I think is, or maybe New Zealand is almost there. So just to tell you what the different authentication, strong and weak authentication trends are. The scenarios, this is in the document and it's described, but just to tell you what the process is that you go through of building scenarios. I can probably summarize it better in this next slide. Having classified the different trends into the 2 groups that I mentioned, the low-tech, high-tech versus weak authentication, strong authentication, I use those 2 sets of classifications, one set and another set, and just by combining, by assuming that the trends went either weak or strong, that they went either low-tech or high-tech, that gave me 4 possible scenarios. Okay, that's a really quick summary of this scenario building process. This current situation, the low-tech, where the customer is physically present, there's not much biometrics or electronics. The weak authentication, where essentially anybody can issue an